Det är som en kamerakvinna här. Det är lite fördröjning. Det syns ju inte.
Ja. Ja. Ja, du är. Ja, precis. Ja, precis. Ja, precis. Vad heter den? Jag pratade med dem tidigare, men de har kontaktat er.
Okay, I think we will start, and it's my pleasure. Happy to have you here, and I'm very happy to see that all of you because when it comes to our seminars, so more often than not, so we do not see as many people sitting here, so it's very nice. And then Inger has got her latest book here, so maybe you can then pass. No, it's not. Where is the book? The book is already.
It's the same.
Okay, but you can have a look, and I think you have got 2 copies. Yes, if somebody is interested. So, and if you are interested, so you can have more information about our seminars. We are going to have one more seminar about Saami issues, or education and North Saami language, about 2 weeks. So you can have more information here. But you're very welcome, and I won't say anything more now, but please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
And I hope my voice is strong enough, otherwise you just shout. And my English is fairly good, but not perfect. Nobody's English is perfect. But this material today, I think, is very suitable for all you who are linguists and similar interested but not so knowledgeable about the archaeological material. So I tried sort to really sort it out. And normally I try to stand because I think you are easier to hear you, but I'm perhaps sitting down now because of these things, practical things. But just tell me if it's also very good with these PowerPoint presentations because you really can take in a lot of material in them and clarify. So we start with Saami area today. It should even be a little bigger, this orange area. And as I write here, I started with a theory that Saami culture today emanate from the old prehistoric Stone Age and then later on hunter-gatherer culture, which is lilac on this map. And then I think it's interesting, and it's also in the title of this talk, these very peculiar views of Saami prehistory before 2000. And it's also interesting that in most part of the 19th century, the Saami were looked upon as Aboriginal culture in nearly the whole of the Nordic countries. But then, because of political reasons, we can say, it started from Norway, really. This theory that the southern Saamis had very late arrived in their today's southernmost areas. But we have, from especially in Norway, Knut Bergsland, the very eminent linguist, and the historian Helge Salvesen, who already in the 70s and around 80 said that we have a long South Saami history. But in a way, they were rather alone talking about that, and they couldn't really make their voices enough heard. So when we started, when new excavations, that was more forceful to change the views. And I published this map in the 90s, and it's a very simplified version, the situation as I see it at the end of the Viking Age, with the vertical line as I see the Saami area, and the Nordic, Germanic with the horizontal lines. And then you get a big area with the two cultures since long ago. But it might be that in the edges this is not perfect, but still it has been very effective and easy to understand. Now I promised to tell about different sources, and we have the material culture, our archaeological material, and then I've also tried to work out from also the written sources, which often aren't really looked upon as they should be, and linguistic material. But that is mostly what I've heard from colleagues or read. I'm not a linguist myself. And I used to say that I once tried to start a big research project with the three subjects, archaeology, history, and linguistics. And I used to say that the real potential among these materials, that is the linguistic material. But then the people working with it must be specialists both in Nordic languages and in Sami languages in order to cope with it. So that's why it's very difficult and it will take a long time. And also because Sami language is not what we could call statsbärande, it's not the dominating language in any country, then it's harder to get money, as we all know. I try to sort the archaeological material, and now I'm talking about little more than 1,000 years at the very beginning of our time reckoning, because otherwise it would be too big material to cope with. We have the graves, and I'm going to talk a lot about those hunting ground graves, so we'll hear more. Then I'm talking a little about the dwelling sites, which are coming more and more. And I worked and collected material both from Sweden and Norway. But I haven't had the possibility to work with the East Sami area, and that would be too much. But in today's Finland is also a lot of material to work with, of course. Other sites and scattered finds, this is a classic sort of trying to sort the material, culture material. Now when it comes to criteria, if you see here, it has been quite hard to sort out what we could define as Sami. And today, young colleagues say, why don't you have a lot of different varieties instead? But that is next step. When I started in the beginning, you know, it's interesting for me to see the difference. I started as a typical Nordic archaeologist, writing my licentiatavhandling here in Uppsala about the casting of bronze ornaments from Viking Age. And then that was a very status position. But when, just by chance, in 1970 I started to work with Sami archaeology, I became more and more invisible as I saw it, because of the subject. And then, also by chance, when I understood in the beginning of the 80s that the Sami had a long history far south, then it became politics of it. So it has been a rather interesting journey, so to say, but also a bit peculiar. So I had to try, and also other colleagues, to sort out, and it was a lot about contrast to Nordic culture. I often use the word Nordic culture. Today I hear many people say Scandinavian, and I think in these pictures I've used both. So similar objects that are known today as Sami, and material from northernmost Scandinavia, northern Norway especially, where the Sami culture is very strong, the North Sami culture. And today we try to talk about the South Sami culture as a culture of its own, with differences also from the North Sami in prehistoric times. And then, as I said, different parts of the material that's really different from the North-Scandinavian culture. And I'll talk later on, which will follow, about the last line here, the changes of function. It's an interesting byproduct. Here we have, and I also had a speech here at Uppsala, this Uppsala congregation, and tried to tell what had happened after we made our studies. And that's especially in Norway. And here in this map you see the large grey area. That's about the area of these hunting ground graves. And the red dot in the south, and the other red area, the area of South Saami culture today. That's the large red area. And there you see these 4 numbers. Those are some of the more prominent finds of Saami prehistoric dwellings from Iron Age and early Middle Ages. And number 2 is the place in Härjedalen, Vivallen, which I'll come back to, where I and my colleagues excavated in the 80s. And then you have 3 places on the Norwegian side and also this small red area in the south. So today they, on that side, discover more and more of Viking age, very typical Saami dwelling sites. And that is a strong thing because these graves have always been discussed because they contain a lot of objects from different parts of the world. But the typical dwelling sites can't be sort of neglected. In Sweden, we have also had especially very good surveys up in Jämtland and Härjedalen. This map is that area of Sweden, Jämtland and Härjedalen, 2 provinces, but 1 county. And we have Eva Ljungdahl and Kjell-Åke Aronsson first, who have surveyed and excavated some Saami dwelling sites. And then Camilla Olofsson has worked with these early graves. I'm coming soon to in Härjedalen from about the birth of Christ. Stig Welinder has spoken very well about at least 4 ethnic groups in Jämtland, Härjedalen during late prehistory. And Lena Sundin here in Uppsala especially worked with these hunting ground graves. But she says they are not clearly defined, and that's also what young archaeologists in Norway say today. We have to work more with those. But on the other hand, I think it's rich material which they do. So now let us see more about those mysterious hunting ground graves. They have had a lot of different names earlier. They were called insjögravar, skogsgravar in Sweden, fjällgravar in Norway, and so on, because of their different positions in the landscape. Here is a site I want. Sege, have you been there?
Yes.
Yes.
Very
Gunilla,
nice.
have you been there? No. If ever you have a chance to go to this place, but it's in the northwestern corner of Härjedalen and not so easy to come to, with a very exotic name, Krankmortenhögen, as you see under this landscape picture. and it was this old lantmätare, what's the name for that surveyor in Jämtland, official one, who gave me the clue about the name. That was a real Saami king, we could call him, in the 1600s, whose name was Morten. And for those who study old place names and oral traditions and so on, it's interesting to note that these graves are about 2,000 years old, and the living person, Morten Jonsson Krank really, he lived about 400 years ago. So evidently, I suppose there was a local tradition about who rested here, but they had about 40 graves, very found on this southern peninsula in the big lake up in Härjedalen. And you see some of the structures there. But then the problems for Swedish archaeologists has been that these graves, the grave type, so to say, to cremate your dead and then construct these beautiful stone markings on top of it. That is a grave type which was taken over from Nordic people, especially around this part of Sweden. But then, on top of these graves, were placed enormous lots of antlers of elk and reindeer, especially elk. I know the word moose is also used, and it's always confusing which to use, but I use here elk. So that is really a mixture of traits taken in from outside and given sort of Arctic ritual shape. And I will also talk more about this peculiar thing with Roman bronze coins. I started, and I think we go as well over to that. I got fascinated by these Roman bronze coins because you don't really find silver coins and not gold coins either in northern Sweden, but just bronze coins. And if you study the international literature, I wrote an article about this in Fornvännen a few years ago. Those types of coins were normally connected with trade. And I could see that the finds in northern Sweden, you see Skellefteå is about the northernmost, and see here, you have some in Finland too, and in Baltic countries, and quite a lot here, but rather few otherwise. And I could see that they were found in what I saw as Saami areas, but areas in connection with Nordic settled agrarian areas. And I think if you look at this distribution map from Dalarna, which is to the left here, you have the hunting ground graves to the left, and you have the coins to the right. So the areas just are rather near each other, but you don't have a Nordic culture at all during this time in this area. I use the term corresponding vessels, and this excellent map is from Claes-Göran Selinge from the big atlas from 94. And here he has the squares in green are from the graves in the agrarian areas. And the more of them, the stronger the color. And then in the inland, he has really sorted out the hunting ground graves as red dots, big ones with many and just smaller ones with 2 or 3, and those with just 1 are not marked at all. And what I find interesting is that we don't have a long one, have we?
Ja, där är hörnet.
Oh yes, we have it here. I find it interesting, and I wrote about that in 97 in Möten in Gränsland, that the oldest ones are here and in this area. And in a way, it seems to be a special connection with the Nordic culture here and these the early Saami graves. But then, the further north you come, you can see that when the Saami graves come up here, they get rich in these areas. You can see the connections. And when it comes to that, you have especially boom in this area. So it's easy to see that they are sort of corresponding vessels really. Then we also had some Norse high status graves with objects that are or might be Saami. And Gunilla has worked with these birch bark pieces decorated, and you very cleverly has said that it's probably sails, because nobody has drawn that conclusion before. It was just remarkable enough to connect them with Saami culture from the beginning, because the archaeologists who excavated couldn't draw those conclusions. She said that Saami culture, she just had been taught that Saami culture didn't exist in those parts. And then I have my thoughts about the large Uppsala mound in Venden, up to the left picture, with a very special comb and spoon with pattern that to me looks very Saami, but it's dangerous to work too much with ornamentation, because, as you know, ornaments come from one culture to the other, so you must have more to come out from. Still we have these hunting ground graves, and in Dalarna, during the period between 500 and 800, you had many of them with very typical Saami hide scrapers, skin scrapers, of a fenogric type, we can call it, which exists also in East Saami areas, and which sat or were placed on a big wooden handles. You work like that with them. And that is a very, very typical object of Saami culture and fenogric cultures. And the oldest I know of is about 600, and they have been used up to today. I have tried in Jokkmokk, a colleague at the museum, her grandmother's, and they are still good to work with, the same type. In the same grave, especially around a lake with the name Hormunden in northern Dalarna, we have a number of these graves around it, and a lot of tools for working with antler, and also waste from antler works and so on. But there is a lot to work with about those. Åke Hyenstrand was professor in Stockholm in archaeology, and he was one of the first to note these implement and the tools, and he was also sure of Saami definition of those graves in Dalarna. So he was early out. Is it about the guy? You have time to read when I go like this? Even more is to say when the graves come into the Viking Age. And I especially worked with a place we'll come back to, connection with the dwelling sites, Vivallen in Härjedalen, and also a place called Långön in Ångermanland further north. And it's a fascinating material, partly also the same material you find in Nordic Viking graves, so to say. You have here imported beads of different materials. This these are imported from the Far East even. And coins, these coins are from Vivallen and those are from Långön. And one of the professors of numismatics in Stockholm said to me, I hope you have noted that these coins from Långön, they have a sort of three-sided hole to hang the coin as a pendant, because that sort of holes only exist otherwise in the large Saami sacrificial sites further north. And I think they just take a knife and rub like that, then you get this type of three-sided hole with one short side and two longer. These arrow points are of a type known from the east. And this is a purse of a lizard. Varan lizard may be from India. Today they say it might have come from little nearer, but still Varan lizard. These men's brooches, you find them on Gotland, for example, but up in the North Norway, they are always in connection with Saami culture, and evidently in the innermost of the inland of Mid-Sweden, northern Sweden also. That's from Långön, that's from Vivallen. These types of men's belts, I talk more about them further on. I understand for all you linguists here that it's not so easy, but I hope I can give sort of general view at least. This fantastic place, Vivallen in Härjedalen, there was also a grave that really confused me for so many years. And the only solution I can find is that it is a shaman's grave from as late as the 12th century. It was a typical man's skeleton, buried very tightly wrapped in birch bark and dressed with a typical men's belt. You see the bronze ornaments here, and the long hangings all belong to the belt. And these men's belts were really sort of status for men from Hungary to northern Sweden, but you don't find them in Norway, really. But this man had more than 40 glass beads around his neck, and no man in a Nordic society would wear that. And the most remarkable of all, he was buried in a woman's tunic, woman's long kaftan, so to say, of thin, very fine wool, and with exquisite bands around the hair in linen threads and woolen threads, blue and red. And in Birke, which I compared with, that was a place, a big trading post which stopped around 950, that's for 200 years earlier. So it's also very late, all of it. He had sewing needles here with 3 small Eastern-looking bronze ornaments like that. And a silver brooch, a silver finger ring, and also a fine little knife like the prestigious Viking women had. So you can understand I was confused and couldn't understand what it was until many years later, since I saw it first. And my colleagues in Norway, they also think that is the right solution. And it's interesting that in a culture like the Saami culture, and also similar cultures in Asia and in America, it was thought of as a strength if you could sort of both have male and female traits in your personality. I don't think they need to have been homosexual, but there were strong personalities. Also the richest grave here on the grave field, the oldest man who is buried. But to compare with Viking Norse society, that would have been a shame to have those possibilities with both male and female affinity, so to say. And we don't know similar things as we know of from the Nordic countries or from the known Saami culture. But we know that there existed also women as shamans, for example. I can see that when the Saami took in objects from the outer world, they also changed them, used them differently, transformed many to pendants. That also an Eastern trade, I think, in Finland in the old days. They liked to hang a lot of beautiful bronze ornaments and so on. But also this thing to use male things for women and the other way around. these more special things, that the same types of objects in northern Sweden are placed on the large sacrificial sites, but here in South Saami area they are placed in the graves. That perhaps is stronger influence from Nordic culture or something like that. Yes, now we leave all these graves and try to get a general view of the dwelling sites. Here I've taken a picture from Norway, very close to northernmost Dalarna. And a typical turf hut, which is a rather steady construction. And in Sami called Gretje. Now this place, Vivallen, it all started with me by chance looking at the finds from early excavations 1913 at the place, 20 graves, men, women and children. And when I saw them first, I had worked for many years for my dissertation with objects from Sami sacrificial sites further north. And I could see that all the objects from the graves were exactly like this typical combination of objects that I found at sacrificial sites in the north. So I draw the conclusion that this place must be a Sami place. And so many graves, men, women, children, they must have lived close by. So I and a colleague in Norway and several colleagues from both Sweden and other countries, we started a project with excavations. And then several colleagues of mine had earlier tried to find a sort of dwelling site here without succeeding. But we found the place with up to now 2 of these typical dwelling sites. And you see here in the middle, we can do like this and come back. A very typical fireplace, rectangular, originally rather large, which we find in Sami culture from Härjedalen and all the way up north to northern Norway. And we can also see you see a thin line here. That's the outer end of the hut, so to say. But in comparison with Norse buildings, it's not easy to find these. That's in the forest now. We found 2 of those, and on both we had large unburnt reindeer bones, which must have been placed there after the last time you used this fireplace. So it must be some sort of ritual thinking, perhaps offerings to Sayaka, we don't know, might be. It's also interesting to see, as an archaeologist, all these different traits that point to tame reindeer herding from the beginning of our time reckoning. Because then in Härjedalen slowly people finished to put elk antlers on the graves. They had reindeer antlers instead. And then now, especially from 1800 and onwards, they have their dwelling sites also in deep forest without all the big lakes and big rivers. So they must have had beasts of burden to carry their things with them. And also this fact, if you place reindeer bones in the hearth, in the fireplace, that means that they must have looked upon the reindeer as tame, because otherwise, if they were wild, you would have taken them in the special ritual little door in the back of the hut, in my view. And I have also colleagues who have studied the biology and different plants and the landscape, both Jämtland and Härjedalen, and they say that all these changes in the landscape must be due to grazing of tame animals. Long from, big distance from the agrarian areas. It's also typical that in Vivalen we find a lot of goat skin, goat furs in the graves, and the archaeologists have said that there are so many parts of the bones of goats, so they must have had goats and probably milked them as well. We also have one piece of iron slag, probably from forging iron, but it's just one. But there are other Saami places from the same time in Jämtland where they very clearly have worked with iron. And in the written sources you have a lot of indications that people in the old days connected Saami with iron production, smithing and so on. This very famous, well-known Saami shaman drum hammer, dated clearly to around 1200, was found on a dwelling site in southern Norway, and it has meant a lot to clearly point to Saami connections there. Many have tried to see if there aren't any traces of offering sites, sacrificial sites in the South Saami area. But most of those are under discussion. And of course there must have been, but to find the traces and date them properly and so on, we must have better material. But we have scattered finds like this remarkable big wooden figures, more than 1 meter high, from a bog in Dalarna, dated to about 1500. And there were also two similar ones, more like up and down turned birch trees, which you can find in this university exercise work by Yvonne Dahl, but I couldn't take out pictures from it. But both were dated as early as the 10th century and as far south as Telemark. And the Telemark province, we'll see the next picture. It's somewhere here. I can't say exactly. Skis are interesting because in the old days they were clearly attached to the Saami. I hope you all know that Gustav Vasa never skied. He walked on snowshoes like everybody else did in Uppsala. That is important. And you must know that in the Alps in Switzerland, nobody had seen any skis until late 19th century. I've heard it might have been an Englishman who learned to ski in Norway, who came there in 1800 something. So that is really quite interesting. And here are the black dots with numbers here, skis of this type that has survived in the South Sami culture and are dated to Iron Age, early Middle Ages. And often beautifully decorated as this one from Trondheim. This type of techniques and specialists working with it, you can also connect with trapping pits. I don't know if you know the name fångstgrop in Swedish. Trapping pits where you can capture big animals like elks in the forest and reindeer in the mountains. And my colleagues have tried to find those in southern Sweden, but we don't have any trace of them. They are all from the area north of what we call Limes Norlandicus. The southernmost ones known are from Dalsland, and then Värmland and northwards. But the large systems of trapping pits, known especially in Jämtland and on the Norwegian side, clearly indicate a type of collaboration between Sami and Nordic people. And of course, both skis and trapping pits early went over also to the Nordic culture. I mean, a lot of people married and had trade with each other, and was practical. So early on, those things were taken over by the Nordic culture from the Sami. Yes, now at last I am coming to some written sources for the historians, but I don't know if any of you can be called historian. Many linguists, but I don't know historian. But still we are all interested in culture and history. I'll translate what it says here. It's Jordanus, the famous Jordanus, his Getica, around 551, about Finni, the name for Sami, still used in West Scandinavia, and the Swedes. It's also these people which, with their indirect trade connections with many other tribes, send black furs to the Romans for their use. So probably as early as Krank Mortenhögen it was utmost the Mediterranean area's interest in the fur trade that might have triggered the interest from Norse culture. Yes, I've already talked about both trade and marriages, and this nice stamp from the Norwegian side shows this famous legend about King Harald Hårfager in southern Norway, who was bewitched by a Sami woman and got 4 sons with her. And we have also tradition telling about the old Uppsala kings who married, several of them, married Sami women, I think 3 of them. So you have sort of far back, way back, you have this connection. And I used to say that, I'll take it up later also, that the Sami then were looked upon as equals different but equals with the Norwegian and Swedish chieftains. And that must have been because of the economic importance, because of their products. And Else Mundahl, who is professor in Bergen in linguistics, she uses to say that up to around 1300 about the Norwegian kings then boast about having married Saami women. But after that, nobody would have had reason to be interested. And Gustav Vasa would never have been interested in that, because then the heydays of the Saamis were over, so to say, in the 1500s. Here you have some information from Knut Bergsland. I hope you linguists here have heard about him. He was a very eminent linguist, a fantastic person. I never forget once when I succeeded in taking him into one of the big trials at court in Härjedalen. And he said, really, I haven't got the time, but I'll help you. I haven't got the time. In 2 weeks' time, I'm going to Japan. And before that, I must learn Japanese. That, you know. Rather fantastic. I'm writing about that in my book because I think he was such a marvelous person. So I could just telephone him about a word and ask him and so on. He was the most intelligent person I ever met. And he knew himself that he had to work hard to sort of really be clear enough for us normal people, so to say. Yes, he was fantastic. And also in his old days, I'd heard that he was a bit ill or so. And I asked some mutual friend, and he said, no, he is in the Aleps giving them a written language. The islands between Japan and what's northwards. So, yes, he was remarkable. And he talked about these words for driving with reindeer and milking them taken up in Saami language from Norse before Viking Age. And he also worked a lot with all the old Saami place names, far south. He wrote a big paper that would have been printed in Norway for what was called Samerettsutvalget, but it was never printed, and I have now in the big archive at Riksantikvarieämbetet my copy with all these maps, which really ought one day to be printed, but we hope. There are also these interesting loans of words. For example, is a young researcher in Copenhagen at the university working with even more words taking over from Sami to Nordic language. The classical example is fox. That is rev in Swedish and similar in Norwegian and Danish, but as you know, in English and German, totally different word. And that was a Sami word from the beginning. And this map is also interesting. Nersheim in Norway, who published it long ago, and he could see that here he had a word for pine marten and prepare skin. And here he could see that the loan words came from Nordic language, and here that they came from Finnish languages, so you could see which their trading contacts had mostly been. Now I come over to one of my favorite subjects, which really is fascinating, that the Sami culture today, what we call the typical traits in the Sami dress, for example, the colt and so on, there are so many elements from Viking age in that. And as you see here, I've listed some, the pattern, this interlacing pattern, for example, the ribbons you find from Viking age, but as I say, it's very dangerous to work with these types of information because the pattern came from the Persian kingdom over to the Norse area once, and then were taken over by the Samis. And we don't know exactly when and how that happened, during Viking age or just after. And the beautiful comb you see in the middle here in the picture is from Birka, and maybe was a Sami product, but we don't know. But this big, beautiful object was found in Uppsala, in the very center of Uppsala, close by the water in mid-Uppsala, and had been placed on a big bag, a skin bag, two similar ones on the top. And those everybody call Sami belt bags, belt frames, I think they say, bag frames. We also in Birka have a very special grave. We call it Elgmannens grav, the elk man's grave. A man buried with weapons and so on, but with a big elk antler by his head. And that was looked upon as peculiar, but nothing more, until they tested with this type of modern technique these two men in the graves what they mostly had eaten, and they had eaten all their life mostly meat. And everybody in Birka, otherwise they were brought up on fish. So they can see that those came from some other area to Birka. And nowadays that is one of the skeleton materials that the genetic specialists today try to analyze and see if they can find out where those people were born. But we don't up to now know if it's possible or not. But the technique is there, but if the material is good enough. This is objects from a rather well-known main grave up in Jämtland, Viking age. And this man had a sword with beautiful antler with a very special pattern that is similar to the wooden handles from Sami drums. And if you look upon this belt bag that he had, that's imported from Asia. We used to call it steppe nomadic type today, oriental we said earlier. Typical status male belt with a bag. And then I tried to follow this back in time, and I find it very probable that that was the type of bag that inspired Schäferes, 1600s, to illustrate this Saami dress. And then we also have it in modern times on this good picture, Nils Andreas Scott from Wilhelmina, who was lived until 1957. So I think that is typical for how objects can be followed. And the person who really worked with this concept, culture fixation, was a famous ethnologist from about 100 years ago, Sigurd Eriksson, and he studied it in folk culture in different parts of Sweden. For example, he said in Skåne, the southernmost part of Sweden, there are many traits of Renaissance, and in Härjedalen many traits from the Baroque, and he interpreted it like that these periods must have been sort of economic booms in this area. And if you take this type of discussion over to the Saami culture, it fits very well with just Viking Age, early Middle Ages as a real economic important period for the Saami. So that fits well. This is a little Saami boy from Norwegian side, grandson to Maja Dunfjell, if you know her. And this type of decoration in thin silver thread, you can follow back in time to Viking Age and very high status male graves on Birka who have this type of pattern in gold thread or silver thread on something on their caps or whatever. We just have the metal found, and that was imported from the East. But we also have this technique with a thin thread, metal technique for cement works and so on for a long time in the Far East. So the technique on the whole can also come to the Saami later on from Asia, so to say. But just this mode of putting this ornament here in metal thread, you have of course to find, like the bags, many connections over time, but still I think that's something to discuss. Yes, as I said today, young archaeologists both in Norway and Sweden, they want a more diversified model. And that is of course the next step to discuss this material. And they are especially critical to the grave concept. They see the big South Saami area, it's not that is the problem, but the graves ought to be better studied. Then we have the genetic research today, and a new project, some of you might have heard about it. It's connected both to Uppsala University and Stockholm University, Atlas of Prehistoric People's Genome in Sweden. And they study core DNA in skeletal remains. They have sent a number of proofs to big laboratories, but they still wait for the answers, and they are not allowed to tell anybody about any results before it's all printed, so it will take a bit of time. And then we have this series. Have you heard about Kjell Åker's views? He says that a professor in Oslo has studied tame reindeer DNA today in Sweden, Norway, and compared it with the similar things from Yamal Peninsula in Siberia. And he draws the conclusion from that there must have been a connection, and that the whole idea with tame reindeer has come from Siberia to Scandinavia during Iron Age. But I think it must have been a long and complicated process because of these loans of words that Thunbergsvägen, for example, could see. I mean, it's probably a long and complicated process which we just now begin to see. Yes, this is a bit of advertising for my book. And now I come as far as this, and now also you must talk and not just hear my voice. So thank you.
Thank you very much. It was so interesting. So I think we could have been listening a lot of more. But please, I'm sure you have the questions and comments and so.
Shall we take in some air, or is it all right?
Ser du alla?
You can,
I have so many questions. Nobody else is taking the opportunity. I will start. No, I'm just fascinated. I will start with the thing of the gender identities. That was really exciting to hear about. Can you tell us more?
Do you mean the specific part
Yeah.
of it?
No, I mean that it was not seen to be gender identity could be like you said that the Nordic, the Viking would not
No,
be
they
able
had very
to.
strict views about that was argy.
Yeah.
That was not allowed in the high-class culture, so to say.
And I find
But
that.
on the other hand, Odin had shamanistic and other sides of his personality, so there is something, but still.
Yeah. No, I wonder the evidence. How many evidence of this? How certain can you say, and until what time about could this? Can this be traced in the older Sami culture of this gender mixedness, or not being so strictly between the?
I think when I realized this was probably the solution to this remarkable grave, I phoned Åke Hultkrantz. I don't know if you know his name. He was professor of history of religion in Stockholm. And he said, oh, I've written about such things. He called it the Berdache Institution. And he studied it in North America in Native Americans' cultures. And he also has connections to Asian old cultural traits. So there are, in those types of cultures, the same. But to find such a good example in the archaeological material, it's not so easy, but probably you have more examples if you really try to look upon it.
It's really exciting.
Okay, I think somebody else was, yes.
Yeah, I was wondering about these hunting ground graves.
Yes.
And what you think is the best evidence that these were Sami graves and not Germanic or mixed or some third ethnicity?
I think the location is very important indeed. It's far from agrarian areas in forest, mountains, and so on, and often by lake, by the shores of lake, especially the older ones on these peninsulas in the lakes. And in the agrarian areas, you never put their graves in locations like that. So I think that is a good starting point. And if you then find graves with typical Sami objects, or as in these graves in Dalarna, that they have imported Norse or international bronze ornaments and changed their use. For example, in that grave in Dalarna with one of the skin scrapers, there are three different Norse ornaments that normally would have been put in a pair on a woman's dress. Then they use three different in one grave instead of two similar as a pair. So I mean, you have to take out those things, change use and change gender can indicate, but you have to have also this information from the linguists, Pekka Samalahti, for example, and others who say that the Sami language area in Sweden, Norway must have been larger to the south once, and Lars Gunnar Larsson is also working with those materials further south than today, so to say. But an Ante Aikio in Finland I've met, but I don't follow exactly all. He has a lot of interesting, good discussions today, which is not so easy to follow for an archaeologist.
I was wondering about something. There's a number of linguists have thought that, or have suggested that because of the, let's say, the archaic elements in southern Sami, that the ancestors of specifically the southern Sami, would have crossed over the Gulf of Bothnia from Finland directly. They wouldn't have come through the north and then spread again southwards.
Yes.
And as far as I know, in Finnish archaeology, there's nothing which would indicate that this has happened.
I've also heard that theory. No, I find it a bit difficult. I think more of, if you see today, for example, Sami culture today, if you compare North Sami and South Sami, in the north, Kautokeino, their ornaments, their metal brooches, they are enormous. And the dress with silk scarves and bright colors and so on. And in comparison, South Sami area has been further out from the center. The ethnological theory is that in the center, the what's the name? The development goes rapidly, but in the end areas, the border areas of the culture, that is more conservative, and can't you also find
But in linguistics, it's the same thing, that on the periphery,
Yes.
you could
Yes, I think it's more a result of that. But I'm not a linguist, I couldn't discuss, but I think it's a bit fanciful, and we don't have any archaeological evidence of that sort of thing. No.
I was thinking if there is any. I mean, on the
No.
Finnish side, I don't think there is, but if there's anything on
No.
the Swedish side.
On the other hand, in many areas the material is rather sparse, so we might still have new finds which will alter a bit, but not in large terms like that. I find it difficult to see.
We'll do a lot of questions now.
I just wanted to say that most interesting for me was to hear about this, the ornaments, especially when you said that ornaments on the spoon and the comb from Thunbergsvägen in Vendel and from the boat graves in Vendel and Valsierde, that those are Saami ornaments. That was I never heard about that, and I'm wondering what that means. On one side, I'm wondering if is it trade or did Vikings adopt the ornament, these ornaments, and on the other side, I was just thinking, I've read quite a lot during my studies about Vendel and Viking Age, and never was Saami culture mentioned. So I'm just wondering.
But I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised at all, because they have been underestimated, undervalued all the time.
Yeah. Because I think it's really interesting to see that, and I think it would be even more interesting to go further with such research.
Yes.
And I'm wondering why it's never mentioned.
Let me see. Come to. Yes, these ones. Yes, Gunilla's worked with it. And for example, those birch bark big pieces also sewn together with the Saami technique, which were several of the boat graves from both Vendel and Valsierde were covered with those. And I read little about it, but I couldn't interpret them properly. So I just thought they were coverings, so to say. But in that case, don't you think, so Gunilla, that either the Norse chieftains could have trade with the Saami, or Saami could have lived nearby? That we can't tell. But in that case, it's just my so to say, ornamentation studies. So those are not as strong to think about as those. And also in my view, I had a talk about that long ago in Uppsala at Saxon Symposium, whatever its name was, that if you cover your graves with typical Saami sails, then you must also have the Saamis in view as an important part of the main culture. And it's not just that you take in objects from another culture, that you must also have see its importance. So I think it's also points to the importance of the Saami culture in people's views during those days. So we are just in the beginning. It's good if you can go on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so you say that there were from at least the late Stone Age two great cultural traditions, the early Saami and the Scandinavian. I'm reading from
Yes,
the
yes,
presentation.
yes.
Do you connect these cultural traditions with languages, with Saami and Scandinavian languages? Because then it will be problematic. Because these languages are
it's very hard, and I think it's also dangerous, because you have these good discussions today that you can't always connect language, genome, and material culture. They might just as today many Sami don't speak Sami, and so on. So I mean, I can't tell about the linguistic side.
Because historical linguists often believe that the Scandinavians must have had one or more other languages originally, and then they shift language, or they got their language from the Indo-European people who came later. And the same thing is probably true with Sami.
Yes,
And
I
how
heard
can you-
all these views.
And how can you tell they are Sami and Scandinavians 7,000 years ago? Couldn't there be different other groups
But
with other names?
don't you think that from the birth of Christ at least,
Yeah,
it
of
would
course.
have been
Yeah.
like today, so to say?
Yeah.
But earlier than that, I can't tell.
Okay.
But we can see that the hunter-gatherer culture, so to say, in Sweden, Norway, we can't see any breaks in time or in the material cultures, just smooth going on. So if there were any major changes, you would have seen it in material culture, I think. But languages and material culture don't need to correspond. So you have to work for yourself in many ways
Yeah.
when
So,
we come to early days.
because there aren't really any traces of Sami language. I mean, there are Nordic lemurs in Sami that no preserved Sami traces from these times, or from linguistic traces. So,
The problem is that you always must date special words in Sami language through Nordic language. So that is really a trouble. So I can't help really. You're a linguist.
Well, I could maybe say something about that because Archeologists, he claims that there are like 500, 400 words which you can't find an etymology for. So there might have been some Archeologic language which was spoken before the Sami came to that. So, but we don't know anything about that. So that's just a wild guess.
And those words usually don't correspond with the non-Indo-European or non-Germanic element in Scandinavian, so it might have been two different languages.
In which languages are these words?
In Sami.
In Sami, or only in
Sami.
Sami languages? Okay.
And he even talks about Finlandic as well. That there might have been like
Yes, I read some papers newly written by him and so on. But I think we must work on different lines and then see.
But all in all, his analysis corresponds with Europe as far as the early Sami area is concerned.
Well, that was interesting. Okay, have we maybe got some other questions? Yeah.
It has been shown that the Sami presence has been much further down south. Is this question still as controversial, or has it become even more controversial? And can you see any differences between Sweden and Norway, maybe Finland?
Finland has had a sound, a good history in that respect. It's in Norway and Sweden, these things, and it was because of the fight for rights for land and water, political thing in the late 1800s that popped up like that. And I mean, this professor in Norway, he traveled 2 weeks in Sami areas and said, I couldn't find any old graves or old place names in Trøndelag, and so on. It was really stupid. But people wanted. I mean, I think it's sad the way history is used and misused, because that suits you. And everybody of us here has a different historical view in one's head. I mean, we have learned things and put together a picture in our head, and I assure you, in every head it's a different view of history. That's why we must discuss and talk about it and try not to misuse history. That's why it's very good with linguistics and archaeology, because those are hard facts, both. But history is difficult in that respect. You can easily misuse it. But I wouldn't say, I think archaeologists more and more understand that we have this long Saami history in the south. So the hard sites aren't there really anymore. But on the other hand, if you hear a discussion about ordinary people, so to say, in Norway, for example, the famous family Fjellheim in the Røros area, some forest owners in Norway said they ought to be tested because they were too intelligent to be Sami. You see, only a few years ago. If you have all these concepts swirling around, in Härjedalen it's still very hard, but not in Jämtland and Dalarna. So old historic traditions and families in which it just goes on this, like in parts of Sweden, you have had fights between families going on for generations, and in Italy, another place, and it's a bit of the same. Troubles with your neighbors.
Thank you. So interesting that you approach this issue of the importance of archaeology, of understanding the history of Sami, and I can see similar issues in North America, Canada, Australia. It's of course, history and archaeology is political,
Yes.
very much, and what is it used for? And I know that you have been doing really important work for Sami in this, and well, being a Sami with a PhD, I'm not sure if I could be a Sami according to those views that Sami cannot be intelligent, but it's interesting that it continues this way.
But I think it's interesting also the difference between Sweden and Norway, that this idea popped up, and my old colleague in Umeå, who has written in papers from the 80s and onwards that here it was a border still there for 3,000 years. And why this border? There was no contact between people living north of the border and south of it. He has written like that. And I once asked him if it was a fence. He was not glad for that comment.
But I would like to my question here is, I suppose you know that there is some work from the Sami parliament. I'm a deputy member of the Sami parliament, but I'm not active in this work. But they want to establish, together with Diskrimineringsombudsmannen, a truth commission. And I think archaeological work is really important, and I've been discussing with them also to bring in Sami scholars. But I'm thinking, I'll ask you, how do you work to promote more Sami to be archaeologists and how to bring in.
There are some.
Yeah, but we have one here that I know.
Yes. There are
Um,
some,
but
and
I think
there
it's
are
so
some
important to.
Norwegian-
We have
yes.
this history of Sami being studied by the others, and there are a lot of things with these skeletons trials that makes it a bit complicated because it's ethical issues in this. So I'm just thinking, how are you thinking in this? How
And
to?
that is also, I'm a bit afraid of the results of this genetics, genetical research. It might better our views and understanding of what has happened, but it might complicate it very much, because if a Sami and a Norse intermarried, like today, it was a mixture of culture. So we also have perhaps that skeletal material, culture, other material, and linguistics and history. I mean, we have very many different fields.
But I don't think that's the problem, actually. To my mind, that's not a problem. We're all mixed.
Yes.
So that's not the main problem. The problem is like the Sami culture of today, and Sami being like since at least a couple of 100 years being the object of studies, and then how to get in, be able to be
Yes, I
within it.
understand
So
what
it's,
you mean. Yes.
and I mean, I'm referring to myself because I'm at Uppsala University, and here we have Sami human remains in boxes. So I'm just, when I read the abstract about the skeleton being investigated, it's like, oh, it's tough.
Yes, I think so too. It's both good and bad.
Yeah. So, well, I'm asking him how do you work with these issues? I know you think. I'm sure you think about it.
Nowadays, I never show pictures of human skulls, which archaeologists we did in the 70s and 80s. So you have to be more careful today.
Yeah. No, I'm saying I think you're doing such an inspirational, important work. I'm just trying to get more ideas from you, or how you're thinking and working. So.
No, I mean, even I probably have. I've got the critics that I have seen this area in Mid-Scandinavia as too much black and white, but I used to say that's better than only white.
Yeah.
At least it's a step forward.
Yeah.
But if you compare, that's why I took this map. I think it's interesting. You haven't had any of those silly ideas in Finland, and everybody knows, and it's published, that down about here you had Sami culture during most of the Middle Ages. So that is well known, but archaeology hasn't been so much studied in Finland as in here, perhaps. So that's a lot more to do.
Mm.
It's less known, but you haven't had this grave misunderstanding as here.
That must be ideology. Ideology, most of all, isn't it?
As I said, this fight for land resources, it's always money.
Yeah.
Even in these respects.
Yeah, of course. And inventing your history by out-defining Sami.
Okay, but well, do you have any other comments or?
Just a comment. If you look at the National Survey of Ancient Monuments, it gives you a very wrong picture also about the situation, because it's only in the north, especially in the counties belonging to FNO, Norrbotten and Västerbotten, that you have surveyed this systematically for Sami remains also, but not even there. You have surveyed all the areas, mostly Sami remains in the mountainous regions and not so much in the forested areas. And in the north, you developed methods in the 80s for finding archaeological remains that were not Swedish. Not until then they started really to find new methods for surveying to find the Saami remains, for instance, and settlements. And all the people working with the survey were equipped with some geological stick to see in all structures if it was fireplaces or not. But when I worked in southern Sápmi, no one did get that. So I had to ask, especially in Jämtland, to get one of these sticks when I was surveying there. And nowhere else, and that is why you don't find settlements in the survey, the National Register of Ancient Monuments, because you had not looked for them in the south, because you had not expected to find them. So there you have all these burials from the Iron Age in the late burials that probably are Sami, but you don't have settlements that belong to them, and that is because you have not surveyed for the Sami type of settlements. Like in Vivallen, when Inge came there with the eyes open for Sami traces, she found the settlements also.
It was just sheer luck that I hadn't had studied Sami material further north, because my colleagues Hallsted, who excavated it, very good excavation, he saw it with Stockholm eyes, so to see. He just saw the similarities to the Nordic culture.
Yes.
And he interpreted also in Vivallen as a holy place. You know, Odensvi, Torsvius, and so on were big religious places during Iron Age in this part of Sweden, and he thought in Vivallen, but that was a name of a fäbod, of a place for grazing cattle in summer. And Vi means vide. What's that in English? Salix. Sälj. Vide.
Willow.
Type of willow, yes. Willow are the trees, but the bush is more sälj. So I mean, he had his Stockholm eyes on. So it's
Like most archaeologists in the south.
yes. And most Swedish archaeologists haven't worked northwards.
No.
So it all depends on which eyes you work
Yes.
with. So we have a lot to do. That's good that
For the next
young people
generation.
here who can take over.
We have to do the Samiland Free University in Jokkmokk and bring up more Sami archaeologists to
Yes.
start out.
Of course, it's
Our ambition.
But it's important for everybody. We must
Yes, it
all-
is important for our history.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not a particular
No,
area.
It's
It would be
general understanding.
Yes.
I think it would be interesting to look at Stockholm with Jokkmokk eyes.
Yes.
Okay, but maybe we will just end this seminar. And yes, Maj-Britt and Inger are going to have maybe some, well, I don't know what, not dinner, but something, a beer, sandwich, something. So if somebody wants to
Join us.
yes, so you are welcome to the company. So thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Or otherwise, you can always mail me. It's good with mail connections.
We had up to 5 viewers. 5 viewers. 50 åskådare.
Men går det att